Hello, my lovely students. Today we'll be reviewing for our first unit test. Our unit 1 is titled Early Man and Ancient Egypt, and it was fairly short as a unit. It consisted of 3 content days. Day 1 was all about the Paleolithic era. Day 2 was all about the Neolithic era, and Day 3 was all about ancient Egypt. Again, this review comes just before our first unit test. If you are taking an odd class with me, then your test will be on Thursday, September 24th. If you are taking an even class with me, then your test will be Friday, September 25th. Let's begin. So let's begin with the Paleolithic era, and eventually we'll transition to the Neolithic era, just like we would be moving on a timeline. The line separating the two is going to mark the transition from one era to the next. What does Paleolithic mean? Paleolithic means old stone. The Paleolithic age is the old stone age. And I want you to look at these 3 pictures to remind you of some of the characteristics of the Paleolithic era. We're going to be talking about where these people originated and where they went, what kind of tools they used, and how they communicated. Our early humans emerged between 400,000 and 100,000 BCE. These Homo sapiens emerged in the continent of Africa, specifically East Africa. This early migration route shows you where these early humans migrated. I have a star on East Africa. Eventually, these nomads, and again, nomads are people who are on the go, who are moving around, wandering about. These nomads migrated out of Africa to Eurasia, and I put a star between Europe and Asia. Eventually, they made their way to Australia. I put a star on Australia. And of course, all the way over to the Americas, and I put a star above North America. In order to get to North America, they had to cross an area called the Bering Strait. At that time when they were crossing, land was exposed, so they were actually able to walk across from Asia into North America. Today, as you may recall us talking about, the waters have risen, the land bridge is no longer available to walk across, and in order to cross, you have to use a boat. And there it is marked on the map. By about 75,000 BCE, archaeologists began applying scientific tests such as carbon-14 dating. Carbon-14 dating was a method used to figure out an approximate date of artifacts or fossils in the past. So again, this carbon-14 dating method was used to analyze artifacts, which are man-made items, usually for historical significance, and fossils, those preserved remains. By about 20,000 BCE, there is evidence of cave paintings, and of course, many simple tools left behind, mostly made of stone and bone. So this is a little glimpse into the Paleolithic era. The transition from the Paleolithic era to the Neolithic era is marked by the end of the Ice Age. As the climate got warmer and the ice began to melt, there were more available dry grasses, there was more water in which to survive around and settle nearby, and it allowed the land to be more user-friendly. Longer seasons, or at least more seasons than there had been. So the Neolithic era means the new Stone Age, neo meaning new. And a couple of pictures to remind you about the characteristics of the Neolithic era. We're going to begin here around 10,000 BCE. when Homo sapiens became more settled and they discovered the benefits of growing crops or agriculture. Homo sapiens learned to domesticate, which means to tame or train both animals and plants. So they were making their animals and making their plants work for human use. By about 9000 BCE, these permanent settlements that were based on agriculture led to job and tool specialization. So there became specific jobs in our settlements, and each job had specific tools needed for that job. We began to see farmers, who of course may have needed plows or harnesses for their animals. We see the rise of potters, who needed pottery wheels and clay. We see the rise of weavers, people who needed material and looms and needles by which to actually weave. Eventually, these kind of changes or additions to society allows for the rise of social hierarchy, where we begin to see that we're ranking jobs and putting jobs in different classifications. By about 8000 BCE through the Bronze Age, we have some examples of our first Neolithic settlements that we've been able to study and that are still around today for us to visit. This map is a map of the Middle East. And on this map, we're going to find 3 of our Neolithic settlements. The first one I'm going to point out to you is Çatalhöyük. Çatalhöyük is found in modern-day Turkey. Its ancient name was Anatolia. And I put a star on my map right around Çatalhöyük in Asia Minor there. In the area called the Fertile Crescent, we'll find 2 of our other Neolithic settlements. One of them is called Aleppo, and Aleppo can be found in modern-day Syria, and I've put a star again on my map where Aleppo is. And I also want to identify Jericho, which is in modern-day Israel, and here it is identified by my star on the map. Our final Neolithic settlement is not in the Middle East, so I'll take that map away. It is called Stonehenge, and I discussed a little bit about my feelings on Stonehenge and being classified as a Neolithic settlement. Stonehenge is pictured above this section, and it is found in England. So we finished our Neolithic era summary, and we're ready to move to our first civilizations, also known as our cradles of civilization, also known as our river valley civilizations, because they all emerge around river valleys. This is a map I showed you in class, and the green on here identifies our 4 river valley civilizations. And here's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I gave you a phrase that might help you remember these civilizations from west to east. Eat more ice cream. The E represents ancient Egypt, and that civilization can be found along the Nile River, and that's the one we're going to be focusing on for our unit test. The M, just so you're reminded, stood for ancient Mesopotamia, the I for ancient India, and the C for ancient China, and we'll discuss these later on in our course. So let's talk about ancient Egypt. I'm going to begin with this statement. Egypt's location proved to be advantageous. So here are some details to help support this sentence. Egypt existed on the Nile River, the longest river in the world, and that river could flow from south to north, and it would eventually branch out into a fan-like delta, dumping into the Mediterranean Sea. This allowed for a lot of trade and transport along this river. In addition, the Nile River would flood annually, This annual flooding allowed for predictability. And with predictability, we had planability, so another advantage. We also know that Egypt and the Nile River were bordered in the west by the Sahara Desert, which provided a natural barrier and a natural protection from potential invaders. We also know that the Nile River would leave rich silt deposits along its shores, and this silt would allow for a very fertile farming. Statement number 2. The Egyptians thought a lot about the future. Let's go ahead and support this statement. We're going to begin with the pharaoh. The pharaoh was the king. The pharaoh was seen to be like a god in human form. He didn't need any written rules because he made them up, and when he made them up, everybody went along with them. So this pharaoh, of course, thought a lot about the future and the survival of his kingdom, but also the future and survival of himself. And with that, we see the rise of these magnificent pyramids. One example was the Great Giza. And in the pyramids, which acted like tombs, we would have the pharaoh's riches, and of course, the pharaoh's pets and other family members. We know that the Egyptians believed in polytheism, and these gods and goddesses that exist in ancient Egyptian belief helped the Egyptians become great humans so they could actually make it into an afterlife. We also, of course, know that the Egyptians practiced mummification. The time and dedication to preserving the body to put it in its best form in order for it to make it into the afterlife shows the dedication that these Egyptians had in thinking about their future. Final statement, the Egyptians were well-rounded. And of course, we know that this can be supported by a lot of details. We know that the Egyptians wrote in hieroglyphs or pictograms. And we also remember that hieroglyphs were discovered or were uncovered or translated around 1798 with the finding of the Rosetta Stone. This Rosetta Stone had on it not only hieroglyphs, but Greek as well, enabling the translation of these glyphs. We know the Egyptians practiced medicine and could check a heart rate and could splint a broken bone. We know that the Egyptians had come up with a 365-day calendar, and also that the Egyptians understood about social classes and society, and that they had a ranking system for where you fit into society called the hierarchy, a hierarchy. With that, I am just going to add that in terms of gender relations, and most specifically gender relations in being king or ruler of Egypt, we tend to see a very egalitarian approach where men and women are equal, fairly equal, when it came to ruling. This marks the end of the overview of our Unit 1. I do hope that you study for our test, and I do know that you will do great. So take care and see you on test day.